And we are back for prepping for winter with the Victarion sample chapter. Victarion has sent some of his Ironborn ahead disguised as a trading galley to surprise the Yunkai. And now he's preparing for battle by bringing forth 3 thralls, a boy, a brute, and a bastard's bastard. And he presents to them the dragon horn for some sort of scheme. And now let's continue. "It will kill us too then," said the boy. Victarion did not oft forgive a thrall for talking out of turn, but the boy was young, no more than 20, and soon to die besides. He let it pass. "The mute sounded the horn 3 times. You 3 will sound it only once. Might be you'll die, might be you won't. All men die. The Iron Fleet is sailing into battle. Many on this very ship will be dead before the sun goes down, stabbed or slashed, gutted, drowned, burned alive. Only the gods know which one of us will still be here come the morrow. Sound the horn and live, and I'll make free men of you. 1 or 2 or all 3. I'll give you wives, a bit of land, a ship to sail, thralls of your own. Men will know your names." "Even you, Lord Captain?" asked the bastard's bastard. "Aye." "I'll do it then." "And me," said the boy. The brute crossed his arms and nodded. If it made the 3 feel braver to believe they had a choice, let them cling to that. Victarion cared little about what they believed. They were only thralls. So here Victarion offers the thralls a deal. Blow the horn once each, and they'll receive land and wives. Of course, everything about this deal is a lie. Victarion fully believes that these men will die after blowing the horn. In the Victarion chapter in A Dance with Dragons, Makoro tells Victarion a translation of the runes upon the horn. "No mortal man may sound me and live." Now, we have no idea if this is an accurate translation, or if Makoro can even read. Nonetheless, Victarion believes Makoro's claim. No mortal man may sound me and live. There's nothing about the number of times. It's blow it and die. The assumption is 1 time is enough. And so Victarion is clearly trying to trick the men into blowing the horn willingly. He presents the situation to the thralls as a gamble rather than certain death. In his head, he thinks they're toast and would have forced them to blow the horn anyway. I suppose he felt tricking the men into willingly blowing the horn would be better and easier. More enthusiastic blows. Now, we have no idea if the horn will actually kill the 3 thralls, just as we have no idea what really happened to Craigorn. Craigorn may be alive and well, and these thralls may come out of this unscathed. But Victarion certainly believes the 3 men will die based on what Makoro has told him. It is of note that Victarion could have just forced 1 man to blow the horn 3 times and saved 2 lives. It seems Victarion is purposely offering as many sacrifices as possible to the horn. Now Victarion's lies continue as the bastard's bastard asks if Victarion will know their names. Victarion, of course, didn't even remember the name Craigorn, the last man to blow the horn. He calls him Claygorn instead, so no, Victarion will likely not know the bastard's name. Now the offer that Victarion makes to the thralls is notably the same deal that Hisdar gives the pit fighters. A risk of death in exchange for a nominal amount of economic gain and remembrance. The fighting pits are a metaphor for war, and on a literary level, this scene with Victarion seems to be a political statement about the military, both in its draft and volunteer forms. The state's offer to men is a risk of death in exchange for some economic gain, some respect, and remembrance. But as with Victarion forgetting the name of Craigorn, society doesn't really remember the men who die in war. It's propaganda used for military recruitment. And as with Victarion, without volunteers, there would just be a draft. So no matter what, men die in war for those in power. Now it is of note that while the boy and the bastard's bastard agree to Victarion's terms, the brute simply nods. In fact, he says nothing in the entire chapter. Again, the brute is the oddest of the men in that he has 20 years of experience. He shouldn't be disposable, not like a green rower, the boy, or an insubordinate bastard's bastard who speaks out of turn. With him saying nothing, I do wonder if he's a mute and one of Euron's creatures. We should probably be suspicious of these men as Victarion didn't bother to know who they were, and one of them comes from Lamentation, the untrustworthy Tom Codd's ship. Victarion is placing quite a bit of responsibility in men he has no reason to trust. "You will sail with me on Iron Victory," he told them, "but you will not join the battle. Boy, you're the youngest. You'll sound the horn first. When the time comes, you will blow it long and loud. They say you are strong. Blow the horn until you're too weak to stand, until the last bit of breath has been squeezed from you, until your lungs are burning. Let the freedmen hear you in Marine, the slavers in Yunkai, the ghosts in Astapor. Let the monkeys shit themselves at the sound when it rolls across the Isle of Cedars. Then, Pass the horn along to the next man. Do you hear me? Do you know what to do? And so Victarion outlines his plan. The boy will blow first, then he'll pass it on to the next man. And then he asks them if they're clear on the plan. And here we see a problem. Victarion never actually said who the next man blowing the horn would be. Blowing the horn is a potentially suicidal act. Both the brute and the bastard's bastard should want to go last. When the time comes to actually blow the horn, there might be some serious hesitation and confusion. In fact, I completely expect there to be a problem with the blowing of the horn in some respect, whether it be confusion or rebellion. George R.R. Martin has a general writing style where an announced or contemplated plan never goes the way it's described. He establishes an expectation and then he subverts that expectation. For example, at the end of A Clash of Kings, Theon thinks heavily about dying in battle or joining the Watch, but in the end, he's captured. In A Dance with Dragons, Tyrion thinks about his ship heading to Lys, Braavos, Myr, or Dorne, but in the end, he ends up in Pentos. The fact that Victarion has spent the time outlining his plan for the three thralls to blow the horn in turn points to the idea that this will not happen. And all of this is a bit of a parallel to Chet at the Fist of the First Men at the beginning of A Storm of Swords. If you recall, Chet spends pages and pages and pages outlining his plan for a conspiracy against Mormont. An expectation is established and then subverted when he hears a horn blow. He hears one blast and thinks Qhorin Halfhand has returned. Expectation established. That's subverted by a second blast. Mance Rayder is upon them. Expectation established. And that's subverted by a third blast. No, in fact, it's the others. Victarion's situation is similar but inverted. He's awaiting three blows, signaling something special, the binding of dragons. If the inverted parallel holds, there should be only one or two blows, and then something unexpected happening. Perhaps it'll be confusion, perhaps rebellion, perhaps the horn will be dropped in the water. Whatever it is, it will be a surprise. So in speaking about the horn's sound, Victarion gives us a little reminder of the surroundings. There's the freedmen of Meereen, the slavers of Yunkai, the ghosts of Astapor, and then there's the monkeys on the Isle of Cedars. Now interestingly, the war in Slivers Bay is about the actors that Victarion names. It's between the freedmen of Meereen and the slavers of Yunkai, with a few wildcards thrown in. One major one being the supposed ghost of Astapor, the Pale Mare. Now obviously dragons and Ironborn are also wildcards, but Victarion curiously mentions the monkeys on the Isle of Cedars. Now I have to say, a lot of time is given to these seemingly irrelevant monkeys on the Isle of Cedars in A Dance with Dragons. Victarion hated the monkeys and some infested his ship, but they eventually jumped in the sea and died when Moqorro came on board. So with the monkeys gone from our story, why is our author referencing them again? Well, it could be a reference to a couple things. First, there are Victarion's lost ships that are gathering at the Isle of Cedars, though they wouldn't be too relevant to this coming battle. The second is the only thing left over from Victarion's trip to the Isle of Cedars, the pork. Victarion's holds are filled with pork, which is a proven dragon favorite. This could be another reminder of Chekhov's bacon. The boy and the bastard's bastard tugged their forelocks. The brute might have done the same, but he was bald. You may touch the horn, then go. So tugging your forelocks is essentially grabbing your bangs and pulling a bit. It's an old-timey practice of respect and obedience to, say, a lord or military superior. The hand ends up going up to the forehead like a salute, and the tug is a slight bow to the head. The practice is only mentioned one other time in our story, and that's with Dunk. He meets Daemon Targaryen II in disguise, and thinks his voice commands respect, and makes him want to tug his forelocks. Essentially, he feels like he needs to salute or bow. And so the boy and the bastard's bastard showed respect to their superior, Victarion, before leaving, but the brute did not. Victarion chalks this up to the fact that the brute didn't have hair, but there are many ways to show respect. The brute could have bowed or nodded, but he did none of these. And so let's remember that the brute is the most suspicious one here, in that he has 20 years of experience. He's not the type to be sacrificed, but he was handed over anyway. He then says nothing the entire chapter. He is silent and, who knows, perhaps tongueless, like Euron's mutes. His only communication is crossing his arms and nodding when the three thralls supposedly agreed to blow the horn, and then on the way out he shows no sign of respect when the other thralls do. If something does go wrong with the horn blowing, it seems likely it'll be from the brute. On the way out, Victarion then offers the men the opportunity to touch the horn, as if it's some sort of honor that they would enjoy or appreciate. This again shows Victarion's growing obsession with the horn. They left him one by one, the three thralls, and then Moqorro. Victarion would not let him take the Hellhorn. I will keep it here with me. Until it is needed. As you command. Would you have me bleed you? Victarion seized the dusky woman by the wrist and pulled her to him. She will do it. Go pray to your red god. Light your fire and tell me what you see. Mokoro's dark eyes seem to shine. I see dragons. So Mokoro attempts to take the horn, and then Victarion stops him and sends him on his way. Mokoro then wants to know if Victarion wants to be bled, and he says that the dusky woman can do it. Now it is of significant note that Victarion's hand still needs to be bled. This means that it's still infected. If we go back to the Iron Suitor chapter, Maester Cerwyn would bleed Victarion's hand. In fact, Cerwyn's bleeding is a very odd, intentionally sexualized scene where the effeminate Maester gets on his knees, as if for fellatio, and causes Victarion's hand to ejaculate pus. Cerwyn's treatments come to an end with the coming of Mokoro. He does something to Victarion's hand behind closed doors, and then Cerwyn is killed. Throughout the Victarion chapter, we hear about the hand being burned looking, but stronger than ever. But here we find that it's not completely healed after all. It's still infected. And so I do wonder if it was ever healed, or if it's just been glamoured. Whatever the case, Victarion says that the dusky woman will bleed his hand instead of Mokoro. Victarion seems to be concerned about the weird sexual nature of the bleeding, and wants it done by a woman. More on this later. Victarion then tells Mokoro to pray, and tells him to report on what he sees. Mokoro says that he sees dragons. Now, we know from the Mel chapter that she is considered the best flame reader around, and she constantly errs and makes stuff up to make herself seem more powerful than she is. If there's one thing to take from the Melisandre chapter, it's that she's more charlatan than sorceress. And so, being just as critical of Mokoro, we can see that his readings of the flames are not actually that impressive. He predicts things that anyone could guess. For example, Daenerys getting married, or coming upon a ship, while getting the type of ship wrong. Or predicting a sudden squall when storms happen all the time. Or predicting that lost ships will catch up to Victarion at Yaros when it's the logical place for a ship to wait. Mokoro's abilities, from what we've seen, are nothing special. So here Mokoro claims that he sees dragons with the implication that he saw them in his flames. But the dragons have actually been free for days. Mokoro might have just glimpsed one off flying in the distance, or perhaps he just figures that during a battle they'll be utilized and released. At the end of the day, there's nothing really impressive about Mokoro's claim. Now, this is the end of what we have for the Victarion chapter, but there have been fan reports from another reading on what happens in the rest of the chapter. According to the report, apparently the dusky woman bleeds Victarion's hand into a bowl, and then Victarion rubs the blood into the horn and murmurs, "My horn, dragons." Now, as I've said before, the horn is sexualized and a stand-in for a phallus, and the bleeding of Victarion's hand is sexualized, so yes, it seems we have some sort of masturbatory moment with the horn in a literary sense that also calls back Gollum. Victarion is clearly trying to compensate for feelings of sexual inadequacy with power. Now, in the Victarion chapter in A Dance with Dragons, Mokoro did tell Victarion that he needed to claim the horn with blood, so Victarion might be trying to activate the so-called magic. This whole bloody situation actually calls back Dany in A Game of Thrones, and then again in A Dance with Dragons. Dany's dreams weirdly include a reoccurring image of vaginal blood dripping down her thighs and onto a black dragon, with Viserys talking about waking the dragon. Victarion is trying to wake the horn, covering it with blood, and the horn is said to be as warm as the dusky woman's thighs. According to the fan report, after smearing the blood on the horn, the chapter continues with Victarion digitally penetrating the dusky woman. So again, we have the image of vaginal blood associated with dragons. And Victarion's digital penetration of the dusky woman is also likely a callback to Dany's wedding night with Drogo, with the chapter ending with Drogo's digital penetration of her. Not to mention the parallels to Cersei trying to feel powerful by digitally penetrating her dusky woman, Taena Merryweather. Now, according to the fan, the chapter explains that Victarion only uses his fingers because he doesn't like orgasming before battle. So again, we see that sex and military power are conflated in the warped mind of Victarion. Now, all of this talk of sex and power is likely a political statement made by our author. When laid out here with Victarion, the joining of sex and military power seems disgusting and corrupt. And yet it calls back Dany's wedding night, where marriage and sex were all for military power. And all over Westeros we see marriage alliances for military power. The point of it all is likely that the system is as corrupt and diseased as the mind of Victarion. Now, according to the fan report, the chapter ends with the dusky woman helping Victarion put his armor on. He then gives a rousing speech to the crew and sets sail towards Meereen. Victarion putting his armor on is an interesting parallel to the Forsaken chapter, Both chapters end with men getting in armor before battle. However, in the Forsaken chapter, Euron dons light Valyrian steel armor that flows like silk. This is of considerable note. Victarion's armor is normal, regular armor, and in the Reaver chapter, Victarion remarks about how the Reachers were not donning armor for fear of drowning. Unlike Euron, if Victarion falls in the water, he will drown. And of course, drowning in a sea battle would parallel the Battle of the Blackwater with Davos. The chapter ends with a war speech, which I imagine is a parallel to Barristan's war speech. And speaking of Barristan, my Patreon supporters have voted, and we will be covering the Barristan sample chapter next. And so Prepping for Winter will return next time with Barristan 1. See you then.